to consume.
Mr. Speaker, here we are again. It's the end of the year, and once more we've come to the brink of a government shutdown. And it's sad to say, but this has become routine. We need to return to regular order, where we pass appropriations bills one at a time and not end up with a 2,000-plus page bill at the last minute that nobody has thoroughly read. And in all candor, the excuse that it's all the Senate's fault is a bit disingenuous. Of the 12 appropriation bills the government must pass each year, we only considered 6 in the House. We stopped considering appropriations bills because some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were more interested in protecting the Confederate flag than in getting the people's business done. Now, we have a deal before us that, if passed, would prevent us from heading toward a government shutdown and damaging our economy. Americans cannot afford another manufactured crisis, something that my friends on the other side of the aisle have become good at. The so-called deal that we will debate today and tomorrow reflects the imperfect process that produced it. I am grateful to my colleagues who worked to get a product to us that hopefully can avoid a catastrophe. I'm especially grateful to the staff who worked around the clock these last weeks to get us to this point. Truthfully, we should be apologizing to the staff for putting them through this ordeal. This is not the way to run Congress. There are 2 parts to the underlying legislation: Amendment 1 to H.R. 2029, the Omnibus Appropriations Act, and Amendment 2, known as the Tax Extenders Bill. Now, the Omnibus Appropriations Act is, by any measure, a mixed bag. But importantly, it does begin to undo so-called sequestration, which has done great damage to our economy and great harm to our people. In my view, sequestration represents an all-time high in recklessness and stupidity. We need to reverse it, and this bill begins to do that. In the Omnibus, there will be necessary increases in funding for NIH, NSF, Head Start, Pell Grants, job training, state and local law enforcement, programs to prevent violence against women, energy efficiency programs, FEMA, our national parks, VA medical service accounts, the McGovern-Dole International School Feeding Program, a reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and a host of other programs. And I am grateful for these increases. And this bill includes a 75-year extension to the Zadroga Act, which supports health care for the brave 9/11 first responders who risked their lives at Ground Zero to save others and became ill as a result. These are true American heroes, and I'm pleased that Congress has finally done the right thing by ensuring that they will be able to get the care that they deserve. One of the things, however, that concerns me about the Omnibus Appropriations Bill is that it contains a controversial cybersecurity measure that many of us feel falls short of safeguarding Americans' private information. Quite frankly, a provision like this does not belong in an omnibus appropriations bill. And last night in the Rules Committee, I offered an amendment to strike this cybersecurity provision. Every single Republican, every single one, voted against my provision. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a dear colleague that was sent to all of us from Representatives Lofgren, Amash, Conyers, Farenthold, and Polis in opposition to the cybersecurity measure being part of this omnibus appropriations bill.
Without objection.
And one additional concern for me and for many others is an awful provision, and I stress the word awful, in this bill, which constitutes a big giveaway to big oil and could lead to an increase in gas prices. Big oil gives big money to campaigns, and sadly, big oil is getting a very big return on its investment with this bill. This provision could intensify climate change, have devastating environmental impacts, and does nothing to save consumers money on energy costs. I will be asking my colleagues to defeat the previous question, and if the previous question is defeated, I will offer an amendment to strike this outrageous provision. My colleagues will have to decide whether the good outweighs the bad before casting their vote on the omnibus bill. Compromise is never easy, but in a divided government, it is essential if we are to move forward. One of my biggest critiques of this Republican-controlled Congress has been the total disregard for Americans who struggle, those stuck in poverty. Time and time again in this chamber, poor people have been demonized and disparaged, while those who are well off and well connected get one tax break after another. So I am pleased that in the tax extenders package, there are provisions to protect millions of struggling Americans from a tax increase and boost family incomes by permanently extending essential improvements to the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit for low-income working families, as well as the American Opportunity Tax Credit to help low- and middle-income families pay for college. All of these improvements to these tax credits were originally passed as part of the 2009 Recovery Act, and each has played a critical role in fueling America's economic recovery after the financial crisis. Making these improvements permanent would be among the biggest steps Congress can take to reduce poverty, and without action, these credits would expire at the end of 2017. Every year, these improvements are expected to lift about 16 million people, including about 8 million children, out of poverty or closer to rising above the poverty line. Simply put, making these improvements to the EITC and the CTC permanent will keep more children out of poverty than any other federal program. The real-world impact cannot be overstated. For example, a single mother with 2 children who works full-time at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour and makes $14,500 a year would lose her entire $1,725 child tax credit without congressional action. For a family on fixed income, this would be a terrible setback. Additionally, making the American Opportunity Tax Credit permanent would ensure this program continues to help millions of low- and middle-income families pay for college every year. In addition to the millions of families these provisions would help, this legislation before us takes important steps to bolster investments in education, job training, advanced manufacturing, infrastructure, and research, while also strengthening national security. I'm especially pleased that this deal includes a provision that would make permanent tax parity for commuters who take mass transit, something that has long been a major priority of mine. For far too long, the tax code has allowed employers to offer their workers more in pre-tax parking benefits than in mass transit benefits. Parity between parking and mass transit benefits was first established in the Recovery Act and has been extended on a short-term basis since then. The bill before us would establish permanent parity for mass transit commuters. It's an attractive fringe benefit that employers can offer their workers. And it offers significant savings to employees who rely on mass transit. It's especially important to my constituents in central and western Massachusetts who take the train every day into downtown Boston. Mr. Speaker, by averting a government shutdown and passing this deal, we will be able to bring certainty to small businesses as well as companies investing in the United States, while extending important incentives that support hiring and investing in low-income communities. Following the historic international climate agreement reached in Paris this past weekend, I'm also pleased that this deal would extend tax incentives for investments in wind and solar energy, helping to drive significant reductions in carbon pollution and other dangerous air pollutants, and provide certainty for investments in clean energy. Investments like these would not be possible without the recent budget deal, which reversed about 90% of the cuts that sequestration would have made to non-defense discretionary programs in fiscal year 2016, with parity between defense and non-defense spending. Mr. Speaker, while there are many positive provisions in this deal, one major concern is that House Republicans' tax extender bill would provide hundreds of billions of dollars in special interest tax breaks that are permanent and unpaid for. Such massive giveaways to special interests like big oil are a step in the wrong direction. As our economy continues to recover, we have a responsibility to the American people to pass legislation that helps to grow the paychecks of hardworking families and make the investments that will build the bright future that our children deserve. I'm especially troubled by the fact that the tax extenders bill continues the misguided double standard of financing tax cuts with budget deficits while insisting on offsets for any increases in domestic spending. Quite frankly, this is dishonest, coming from my Republican colleagues who so often claim to be focused on reducing the deficit. So many American families are working hard to get back on their feet and give their children opportunities that they deserve. Continuing this double standard of holding back on investments we could be making now to help even more of our fellow citizens is inexcusable. So extending hundreds of billions in tax breaks to the most powerful interests when our country needs much stronger investment in jobs and economic growth for all is a troubling and sober reminder that we must do more to put hardworking families first. And quite frankly, I think it highlights the difference between the two parties. Democrats have long championed the importance of investing in our infrastructure, investing in our people, and investing in our economy. Mr. Speaker, the omnibus spending bill and the tax extenders package before us today is not perfect, and members on both sides of the aisle are going to have to decide for themselves whether the good outweighs the bad. Clearly, there are some good things, and there are some bad things, and hopefully in the future that we will return to regular order and do our business in a more thoughtful and effective way. And at this point, I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from